Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel and welcome to my omnibus series. I've got so many of these omnibuses that are going to come out so that you'll be able to listen to an hour's worth of stories, which I know you're going to love. You know, the thing is that telling stories is such a fine art, and it's something that was practiced hundreds of years ago when people didn't have the technology that we have today. And everyone would gather around the fire and listen to a wonderful story. And also, what is so wonderful about a story is that personally, I think it is the best way to go to sleep. Every night when I go to bed, I always listen to stories. And that's something that parents used to do with their children. It's something that they still do with their children. There's nothing better than a good story. And so I hope you're going to enjoy this series. And before we start, I just want to say, do subscribe to my channel because you don't want to miss out on anything. Because I'm in for the long haul and I want to make sure that you get the most stunning stories to go to bed with at night or to listen to when you want to be one of those people sitting beside the fire and listening. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and let's get started. I hope you're going to enjoy the omnibus. Dear Sarah and all your listeners, I live in the Alaskan Triangle and my name is Katrina. I'm a native Alaskan born and bred, and my family has lived in this magnificent part of the world for many generations. I grew up in the heart of the Alaskan wilderness with my family and my father and mother, who are brilliant hunters. As children, they taught us everything we know, and that is how to survive in the most austere, remote, and challenging environments. Living the easy life is something I've never known, because life here is always hard, and learning to survive when you're off-grid is something that they would never teach you in school. I know Bigfoot is real because I saw one a handful of times on our property and see one from time to time. And he always seemed to be very elusive, shy and curious. On many occasions I would sense that he was watching me, and when I would look around I would never see anything. But sometimes I did get a glimpse of the creature peeking at me from behind the tree. He always looked curious. His face was long and ape-like, with some human features, and his head looked like a comb. I never got to see ears because they were covered in hair, but his eyes were brown, lips slim, and nose flat, and his body was covered with massive amounts of sandy brown hair. Sometimes when I was at home doing chores or washing dishes, I would see this brown mass flying past the window at lightning speed. It would happen so fast that sometimes I believed my imagination was playing tricks on me. I just knew in my heart, though, that it was him. And I kind of liked him being around in a weird sort of way, because he seemed harmless enough. And I guess I was as curious about him as he was about me. Sometimes in the berry picking season, I would find piles of berries outside our front door. No one in our family knew where the berries came from, but I knew they were from him, and I always used the berries to make the most delicious jams. You see, every time I saw the creature, there would always be this faint, musty, sweaty, wet sock kind of a smell that would linger in the air after he had been around. So that was why I always knew when he was around. Sometimes at night I would hear whoops and tree knocks, and I assumed automatically that they were coming from him. One night I heard this really horrifying cry coming from the wooded area on our land, and I thought someone was in trouble because the scream was so convincingly human. I was surprised that my parents were still fast asleep and had slept through that horrible wailing scream. I took up my rifle and went investigating. I really thought someone was in trouble. That is how convincingly human the cry was. What were they doing on our land was another thing, but I would worry about that later. As I got closer to where the noise had been coming from, I heard it again and ran in the direction of the scream. Before I knew it, I went plunging headlong into this massive, huge black blob of fur, and I was looking into the menacing red eye shine of the most gargantuan Bigfoot. The creature was not like the gentle one I had often seen on our property. This one was hideously ugly, and evil looking, and he stunk like rotten eggs. He was so enormous, I would say he could have easily weighed 1,000 pounds, if not more, and he was about 8 foot tall and 7 feet across. The creature looked like he had stepped out of your worst nightmare, or was the evil monster on a horror movie you were about to watch. That is how surreal and out of place this creature looked. He belonged with all that is evil, all that is dark, and all that is gruesome and satanic. The creature threw me over his shoulders, and I started hitting him and screaming at the top of my lungs, and he ignored me. I tried pounding and hitting his body with my hands, but it was futile because nothing I did appeared to hurt him at all. I continued to scream as loudly as I could at the top of my voice, hoping that my parents would hear me and come and rescue me from this formidable beast who had only one intention, and that was to kill me. The hate I felt from this thing was tangible, and I knew that my life would be over in minutes, if not seconds. I continued to scream with all the energy that I had that was left in my body. Suddenly something or someone attacked the creature that was carrying me, and the creature that was carrying me let out a horrendous scream. Whatever it was, something had hurt him badly. Then I heard a huge thud, and then a brown pair of strong hairy arms took me off this creature's shoulders and put me gently on the ground, and then pounced on top of the black creature who had snatched me up on his shoulders. Before I knew it, the big creature lay on the ground, and on top of him was the brown Bigfoot that I had seen from time to time on our land. The two animals started to fight, and I realized with pleasant surprise that the brown Bigfoot that I often saw was way larger than his black opponent. I had never realized how large he was, and I knew without a doubt who was going to win this fight. I ran away from the scene as fast as I have ever run before, and returned home to live another day. Since that terrifying event, I never saw the hideous black Bigfoot ever again, but on one occasion, and sometimes from time to time, I do see the brown one. For some reason, I think I am part of his territory, which is fine by me, and I'm thankful for that. One day I saw him actually marking our territory around our property, and he was urinating everywhere, and I believe he was sending a clear message to keep away and off our land to all the other Bigfoots out there. So I can truly say I do feel safe, because Bigfoots exists, and you get evil ones and gentle ones, just like you do with humans. I do not know if you believe my story, but that is fine by me. I probably would not if I was you. Nevertheless, it feels good to tell my story, and I hope you found it, at the very least, interesting. Well, do you believe that story or not? I hope you enjoyed it. Dear Sarah and all your listeners, my Bigfoot encounter happened when I took on an investigation for a client of mine. You see, I'm a private investigator, and I take on all kinds of cases for people. One day, a very wealthy client came to see me because she believed her husband, who was 20 years her senior, was cheating on her. My client looked like she had been a model in her younger years, and despite all the Botox, the ravages of time were starting to show on her face. She gave me the impression of being a trophy wife who had married for money so that she could live the dream jet-set lifestyle that many so aspire to. I naturally asked her why she believed her husband was cheating on her. I need to know these things, whether the case has any merit to investigate, even though in this case it seemed clear that money was no object. I was informed that she had found contraceptives in her husband's jacket, and she had seen pink lipstick marks on one of his shirts, and that he had brought a diamond necklace worth a fortune from a jeweler, and she had found the receipt in her husband's wallet, and she said that she had never received this jewelry herself. When she told me all these things, I decided to take on the case. My client lived in a huge mansion 40 miles from Toronto. It was on a land of vast acreage with a lake surrounded by natural forest, all of which belonged to her husband. My client gave me the keys to the property and to a little cottage on the grounds. I want you to stay there, she said, so that you can sneak around and take photographs of my husband with his floozy. I am almost certain he will entertain his mistress at our place the moment my back is turned and I am out of the way. She gave me a list of instructions, including her husband's time schedules the access codes of the property, and all the details about how to contact her. I will be in Paris for a few days, she told me, but keep me posted on all the comings and goings of my husband. I will need plenty of photographs of the two of them together. I need you to find out who this girl is and all the finer details about her. So it was on a Friday evening in the early fall that I found myself entering the premises of a very grand property that was both gargantuan and palatial in its appearance. It was surrounded by rolling hills of lavish green, perfectly manicured lawns and flower beds filled with colourful flowers of every description. Even the hedges on the property had been chiselled to perfection into beautiful shapes that were works of art. There was also a beautiful lake that glistened under the fading light of the early evening. Surrounding the lake was a large, beautiful forest that seemed to stretch out from here to eternity. I noticed some activity by the lake. There was a white van parked on the grass on the edge of the forest with a sign on it that read "Perfect Romantic Evenings for Hire." I found out that my client's husband had ordered dinner for two to be served in a clearing in the forest. I could see tables being set and candles being lit. I decided to find a good spot behind 3 trees very close to the table where I would get a good view of my client's husband and his mistress when they arrived for dinner, which would be wonderful for taking great photographs of. This looked like it was going to be one of the easiest cases because I was going to get perfect shots almost immediately of my client's husband's infidelity. I waited for what seemed a long time, seating myself on the golden leaf litter on the forest floor and armed with a camera. On this night I do remember the quietness of the early evening. The white van had long since left, the candles were lit, and there was piping hot food parked in bain-maries for a help-yourself buffet on a large sideboard draped in purple satin. I thought it was ironic how romantic everything looked, with the table dreamily covered with heart-shaped flower arrangements, golden cutlery, and purple satin table linen. Yet on this night there was an icy cold ambience to the air, made worse by the stillness of the forest. There were no crickets singing and no animal sounds, and I could instinctively feel as if something was not quite right. I did notice 2 trees in the clearing that had been uprooted and replanted in the ground the wrong way up, so that the roots stood up. It was weird and creepy, to say the least. Suddenly I heard the loud purr of a car engine. I heard car doors being slammed and laughing voices getting closer and closer, and then footsteps, and then they were there, close to the clearing. I saw this elderly man in his 70s holding hands with a woman young enough to be his own daughter. The young woman reminded me of my client, but only a much younger version of her. The couple embraced, and I took a couple of photographs of them kissing passionately, and they were so caught up in that romantic moment that they did not see or hear me. It was not long before the couple were drinking champagne and tucking heartily into a beautiful meal when suddenly there was a heavy sound galloping through the woods like a horse and carriage. I suddenly felt my hackles rise and my heart almost missed a beat. What the heck is going on, I wondered. Suddenly the thundering galloping sound continued, and then I heard a loud snap, and then more snaps and a large branch snap, and then I saw him. He stood in front of the table where the couple were sitting, and they were both screaming in terror. The creature's eyes were like blazing red saucers, and they were filled with rage. He looked like the devil had summoned his monstrous workforce from the depths of hell, as this creature was blacker than the blackest black, and darker than the darkest dark. It stood at 8 feet on 2 large legs and was as wide as it was tall, and this thing was covered in bedraggled, clumpy hair from head to foot, and his hair in the light of the moon had a luminescent quality to it that made this creature look hauntingly supernatural. It let out a menacing roar, curling its mouth back to reveal huge, glistening white teeth, and the noise that he made shattered the crystal glasses on the table, and was so frightening that even a lion would have felt intimidated by this thing. The girl continued to scream, and in one lunge the creature threw her up in the air like a pink Catherine wheel, and she landed on the ground with a loud smash. I was almost certain the girl was dead, because she lay there in a motionless bundle on the forest floor. The older man, who was clearly unfit, made a desperate attempt to flee this thing. The terror on his face was palpable, and he was screaming, "No, please, no, no, no!" The creature pounced on him like a lion on its kill, and he held the man down with one large arm that rippled with dense muscle. I watched those fierce red coal eyes blaze directly into the eyes of the man, and then he let another murderous scream that was more terrifying than any noise I have ever heard in my entire life, and hope that I will never ever hear again. He then tossed the man into the golden leaf litter with one of his legs, as if he was a pile of poop he wanted to cover up. The look on his face was of sheer disgust. He then gave several deep guttural growls, and then ripped all the chairs and furniture into shreds, as if they were made of paper, and they crumbled in his human hands like they were dry pieces of bread. The strength from this thing boggles the mind, but bear in mind he was at least 1,000 pounds in weight, so he was extremely strong. He then twisted branches and bent them down into strange angles, which looked like he was laying claim to the land where he was standing. And then in an act of defiance, he weed all over the area like a lion that marks its territory. I could not believe how much urination he had sprayed everywhere. It was almost as if he had hosed the place down with urine. It was extraordinary. I was terrified the Bigfoot would spot me from behind the tree. My clothes clung to me in damp rags because I had sweated so much from the fear, and my pants were sopping wet because I urinated on myself when the creature screamed. Now I could feel my whole body shake, and I had no control over this trembling, and even my teeth were chattering, and they could not stop. For the first time in my life, I had tasted the bitterness of true and real fear, and I could feel nausea sweeping over my whole body, and before long I knew I would be vomiting. The creature looked around at the chaos he had created. 2 bodies lay on the ground in 2 seemingly lifeless heaps. The creature looked satisfied, and his fury dissipated, and then he just walked back into the undergrowth, the way that he had come. But this time he almost vanished like a ghost, and disappeared from my sight. Once he had gone, I vomited and vomited until I could throw up no more. In fact, it started to hurt, so I couldn't vomit, even if I tried. I could taste that bitter aftertaste in my mouth, and it was foul. I phoned the emergency services immediately and said that 2 people had been attacked by a bear. In my profession, I will never ever admit to seeing a Bigfoot, but you mark my words that that is what I saw without a doubt in my mind. I am only relieved that he never saw me. The girl was taken to hospital and had multiple injuries and many surgeries. I gather she received such a thumping on her head that she completely lost her memory and did not even remember her own name or who her parents were. As for my client's husband, he was in hospital for over a year because he sustained multiple injuries. Sadly, he became an alcoholic and has been in treatment many times to overcome his addiction. I believe the trauma of his Bigfoot encounter drove him to drink. My client got proof of her husband's infidelity and received an excellent payout in her divorce, and she did not even have to fight for the mansion because the husband was eager to let her have it without putting up any resistance, and we know why. As for myself, I received trauma counseling about my bear attack. Even my counselor, who is treating me for my anxiety, is clueless that Bigfoot is the true perpetrator of my emotional turmoil. Truly, this was the worst case I have ever taken on in my life, a price that was quite frankly too high a cost to pay as far as I am concerned. I hope your listeners found my story of interest. Dear Sarah and your listeners, my name is Daisy, and my Bigfoot encounter happened to me when I was staying with my sister Rose in her remote cabin in the heart of the American wilderness in the Appalachian Mountains. My sister Rose was one of the kindest, loving people I have ever known, but she had a penchant for choosing men in her life who would always abuse her. In one relationship, it got so bad that the boyfriend who beat her up was jailed for a whole 18 months. Once again, Rose had fallen in love with a man who was a passionate hunter, but even from the moment I met him, I knew that once again that Rose was caught up in the snares of another pitiful relationship, and I just had this gut instinct that this fellow would start abusing her, because I felt it in the pit of my stomach. It turned out I was right. Rose had phoned me one morning in floods of tears to tell me that not only was her boyfriend abusing her verbally by calling her all kinds of nasty names, but on 2 occasions he'd locked her up in the laundry room for an entire day, where she couldn't eat or even go to the bathroom. She said she had also been hit a few times by him and had bruising all over her body to show for it. I tried to persuade her to file a police report and come home to the family, but she was determined to make the relationship work because she had discovered that she was pregnant. It turned out that this boyfriend of hers, called Jason, did not want to have children, so she was too frightened to tell him about the pregnancy in case he had a tantrum and completely lost it. I decided I needed to talk some sense into my sister, so I made plans to stay with her for a few days because I felt that if she carried on dating abusive men, one day she'd find herself in a shallow grave somewhere out in the wilderness. Little did I realize those thoughts would come to haunt me sooner than I realized. My sister was delighted to see me, and she confided in me about how terrifying her boyfriend Jason was. I gather she'd been unable to make friends in his circle of hunting friends because they were a tight-knit community and did not take kindly to outsiders. I was stunned to realize how alone my sister was and how little time Jason spent at home with her. And when he was home, he was invariably always angry and spent his time watching the box and downing excessive amounts of beer. I decided one of the best ways to talk to my sister was to get out into that lovely, fresh Appalachian mountain air. There was a lake surrounded by beautiful valleys with ubiquitous trees. What would be better than having a picnic by the lake? I remember that day so vividly. It was beautiful and sunny, and the sky was the most gorgeous blue, and the whole area around the lake was filled with the most delightful bird song. On the lake there were wild ducks bobbing on the water, and we even watched a fish eagle darting and diving for fish, until finally, in his sharp talons, we saw that he had caught a big one. We watched him tear the flesh and eat his catch hungrily, and we marveled at how lucky we were to witness such a spectacle. Soon we were tucking into delicious turkey and cheese sandwiches, washed down with fizzy colas. And then we noticed that the wild duck had flown off. The bird song had all but ceased, and as for the fish eagle, he was suddenly nowhere to be seen. "Hear that?" said my sister. "I do not hear anything," I told her. "Exactly," she said. "That's my point. Why has it suddenly grown so quiet, and just so quickly?" It was indeed eerily quiet. You could have heard a pin drop. There were no animals to be seen anywhere, no deer, nothing, and the lake just shimmered in a silver haze under the mid-morning sun. Suddenly we heard a large rustling sound, like something big was crushing leaf litter and twigs under its feet, and it appeared to be walking through the trees towards the lake, and whatever it was, it sounded very, very large. "A predator," whispered my sisters. "That's why it's gone so deadly quiet. I understand now why that's happened. We must hide." We crouched behind a large tree stump that was about 6 feet wide and about 4 foot high. The rustling sound got louder, and then we could hear the sound of heavy feet getting closer to the lake. The first thing that hit us was the awful smell that I can only describe as smelling like rancid, decaying flesh. It was revolting, and I was beginning to feel really queasy. My sister and I peeked over the right side of the stump closest to the lake, and then we saw it. At first it looked like a big grizzly bear, because this thing was large and covered with long, dense brown hair. Suddenly I noticed the creature's exceedingly long arms that were swinging backwards and forwards, and I realized this was no bear. The creature had hands and not paws, and as it swiveled its head towards our side, he appeared to have a cone-shaped head with a primate-looking face that had some human characteristics about it. The creature walked closer to where we were hiding, and terror rose in my heart. I could feel my heart beating very, very fast in my chest, and all the hair on my arms stood up, and I had goosebumps. I kept praying to God that this thing would never see us, because he was so powerful, so big and dangerous, and I for one did not want any close encounter with this thing, whatever it was. I suddenly felt water trickling down my thighs and realized that I had wet myself in fear. The creature grunted loudly. I do not know how to explain the grunt to you, because it was like a pig, only 10 times deeper and 10 times louder. It was a formidable sound that did not endear us to the creature in the slightest. Suddenly I realized that this was a Bigfoot, and I realized that I was privileged to be this close to a creature that so many have been dying to see. But at this moment I felt anything but privileged and anything but lucky. I just wanted to run away as fast as I could. We were way too close to this creature for comfort. The creature paced up and down the bank of the river, and it was almost like he was in deep thought. When he moved, his walk was fluid and graceful, which was amazing for his 8-foot stature and 900-pound weight. All the time the creature paced, he grunted and grunted. It was weird, to say the least. After a while, the Bigfoot squatted on the ground and stared out over the lake. I promise you, it really looked as if he was basking in the sun and admiring the view. After a while, he started rubbing mud all over his hair from top to bottom, even covering his massive feet with the stuff, as if he was lathering himself with a sun protection lotion. No wonder the thing ponds to high heaven, I thought to myself. We heard a whistling sound of what I thought was a bird call, one I believed I have heard on many occasions. So imagine my surprise when the Bigfoot responded to the call by whistling back. He then got up in large strides, swinging his arms backwards and forwards. He retreated the way he had come, and I marveled at the flawless grace of this spectacular creature. Once the Bigfoot had left, I rose and forgot my fear, and both of us started jumping up and down with excitement. We saw a Bigfoot, we saw a Bigfoot, we cried out with glee. You know what a huge deal this is, and we got such a great view of him. Why don't we go and see if the Bigfoot left a footprint by the lake, I said. And sure enough, larger than life was a massive 19-inch footprint with the big toe splayed outwards in the mud. My sister and I were so excited, and we took dozens of photographs of the footprint with our cell phones. And in order to create a measuring scale, I used my pink glitter ballpoint pen against the print. My sister was so eager to share the good news with Jason, her boyfriend, about the Bigfoot. His eyes grew as round as saucers as he asked us hundreds of questions about our encounter. Did the creature smell? Was he aggressive? How close was he to us? I do believe it's the only time that I've ever seen the man animated. My sister told me that as Jason was in such a good mood because of our Bigfoot encounter, maybe it would be the right time to tell him about the baby. And foolishly, she did. The expression on Jason's face was one of murderous rage. I could see how furious he was that my sister was pregnant, and the only reason he did not lash out at her was because I was there. I think you should have abortion as soon as possible, he said. My sister's face was a picture of horror, and I was proud of her putting her foot down. No, never, she said. I will never get rid of my baby. It is part of me, it is part of you, and I'm not getting an abortion. Never, she said. A couple of days later, I returned to my home, kissing my sister goodbye. Little did I know that this was the last time I would ever get to see her again. 2 days later, police arrived at my door telling me that Jason had reported my sister as having gone missing, and that he had found a strange footprint outside the kitchen door, whom he believed belonged to the individual who had abducted or killed my sister. I asked the policeman to show me a picture of the print he found outside the door, and believe it or not, it was my sister's cell phone picture that we had both taken by the lake with the pink glitter pen beside it. I explained to the policeman that Jason was lying and that photograph had been taken by my sister. Inadvertently, Jason had tried to blame Bigfoot for my sister's disappearance. Sadly, all these years later, my sister has never been found, and she's missing, assumed to be dead. And Jason, her boyfriend, remains a person of interest in this case. So there you are, that's my story. Bigfoot was the scapegoat for Jason, who I'm sure may very well know where he has buried my sister. But until we find the body, there is no hope in being able to prove that Bigfoot did not do this, even though the police know that to be true. Dear Sarah and all your listeners, my Bigfoot encounter happened in early fall. I had recently got divorced from my ex-husband, and I was looking for a home in rural Kentucky to raise my 2 boys. Price was a huge issue to me, as I had a very tight budget. One day my estate agent showed me around this beautiful property that was at the end of this delightful cul-de-sac on a rural road. It was situated against a beautiful backdrop of forests that went back for hundreds of miles. All the houses in this lovely cul-de-sac looked almost identical, but the one I was looking at was much more spacious and individual, and far more personal. And for me it reminded me of a cozy little English cottage, something I'd always aspired to own. The estate agent encouraged me to put an offer in for the property, and so I did, but I was offering a price far too low for anyone to ever consider, of a property that was worth much, much more. Imagine my surprise and total elation when the agent told me that my offer had been accepted. I was amazed to buy such a quality home at such an incredibly low price. I could not believe how fortunate I was. So weeks later we moved into our new home, and to say we were ecstatic was an understatement. We were completely over the moon. However, my enthusiasm for my purchase dissipated when the next door neighbour revealed to me that my house had been on the market for 4 whole years without a single buyer in sight. I was told that people who bought the property in the past came and went, and no one stayed there longer than 3 months. Rumours abounded that my house was haunted. Naturally, I was upset to learn all this about my home and wondered if I had been too hasty in buying the property in the first place. I did not believe in the supernatural, so all this ghost stuff seemed ludicrous and preposterous to me. Even so, it left a nasty taste in my mouth. Why did people desert the place after 3 months? It seemed a crazy idea. 2 weeks went by without any incidents in my home, so I began to wonder whether all the rumours were just pie in the sky, and I certainly hoped they were. Just when I began to settle into my home, I went shopping one day and started to retrieve the food parcels from the boot and bring them into the kitchen. However, when I went back to retrieve my shopping, 10 large bags of food had simply vanished into thin air from my boot. They were completely gone, and it had taken only seconds for them to vanish. I looked in my boot, I looked around the car, I looked everywhere, but could not find my bags. 20 minutes later, I happened to glance out of the living room window and saw something scattered across the grass. They were the remnants of a few of my groceries flung across the lawn that clearly the thief did not want, like coffee, washing powder, soap, flour, baking powder, cocoa, and cappuccino sachets. I went into the garden to retrieve the scant items that were just lying there, a little worse for wear. It was all very odd, I thought, examining the 6-foot fence that separated our property from the forest behind us. It was kind of like a boundary wall. I was wondering if a homeless person was living in the forest and scaling my fence to steal my shopping. It seemed like a plausible explanation to me. My attention was drawn to a large muddy footprint on the ground near the fence. The footprint was 18 inches and was massive. It was also a bare footprint. I now was certain that someone was living over my fence in the forest, and he was stealing my shopping and wore no shoes, and to make matters worse, he was going around barefoot. I wondered if he was barefoot because his feet were so large and he couldn't find a pair of shoes to fit. I had heard about people like that before, that had to have their shoes especially made for them. I did feel a smouldering sense of sympathy for the poor fellow not being able to wear shoes, because we were starting to get colder weather as winter would soon be approaching, and in my experience, nothing is worse in this world than freezing feet. So what kind of thing was this vagrant stealing from me? It was meat, vegetables, lots and lots of fruit, sweet things like donuts and cakes, and so whatever it was, I guessed that he had a very sweet tooth. One morning, one of my children told me that he had woken up in the middle of the night and seen red eyes staring at him. My other child had a similar experience, but believed he had seen a ghost through the window. "It was a big black mass, Mum," he told me. "It looked at me through the window with big, round, scary red eyes. It grunted and then floated on the lawn and then vanished before me." I had never believed in ghosts or demons, but two of my children reporting similar experiences was more unusual, and there had to be some merit to their stories because there were two witnesses to these red eyes. Something was going on in our house, and I needed to get to the bottom of it. It was my Wednesday weekly grocery shopping day, and I decided to take no chances as far as the vagrant was concerned. So I made sure I locked the boot before I retrieved my shopping. But guess what? When I returned to the kitchen, the shopping that I had previously bought in from the boot had been completely stolen. It was snatched. There was no sign of it anywhere. Whoever was stealing my shopping was remarkably clever and managed to remove my shopping with so much stealth that I had neither heard or saw them. One thing I knew was that the thief who was stealing my groceries had a massive odor problem, because I could smell wafts of stale urine blended with a wet dog and dirty, sweaty sneaker kind of smell. It was nasty. Is this how bad I would smell if I didn't bath for a long time? I wondered. Once again, I found discarded items of shopping on my lawn. It came as no surprise to me to see that bathroom soaps and shampoos had been completely discarded and promptly thrown over the fence back to me. This homeless person did not even want to practice good hygiene, I thought. The following week, when I did my shopping, I decided that I would backtrack on myself. This would mean I would pretend to go to the shopping bag. I would pretend to get the shopping bags from the boot, but would creep back to the kitchen to see if anyone was stealing the shopping that I had already brought in. I needed to confront this man and possibly help him in some way, but this stealing just had to stop. I made a note of all the help available to the homeless so that I could help the man get some warm food, a roof over his head, and a nice warm hot bath. I even made inquiries about where I could get shoes made for people with 18-inch feet. And there are people out there that will make shoes for very large feet, believe it or not. So now was the moment. It was a Wednesday morning, and I placed the shopping bags on the kitchen floor and then pretended to go back to the boot to retrieve my shopping. But instead, I tiptoed back to the kitchen. Then I saw the thief. But what I saw was not a homeless man like I'd expected, but a massive, hairy creature with thick, dark black hair. At first I thought it was a bear in my kitchen, until he turned around and I saw a primate-looking face with brown eyes staring at me inquisitively. The creature was so huge, standing at about 8 feet tall and 8 feet wide, and he looked extremely comfortable in my kitchen. I really did feel tiny by comparison to this creature, like the girl on the King Kong movie, standing next to that massive ape. This animal, whatever it was, threw the shopping bags over his shoulders as if they weighed nothing, and then I saw him leave. He took a few strides to get to the fence, and I watched in awe from the kitchen window as he just stepped over it as if it was nothing. I stood there not moving for several minutes, unable to believe what I was seeing. I suddenly saw the undesirable shopping purchases being flung back over the fence at me. Suddenly it dawned on me that this creature might be a Bigfoot. No way, I thought to myself. Bigfoots aren't real. Those kind of creatures don't exist. I had always believed this stuff about the creature to be hocus pocus and stuff and nonsense, and I had pooh-poohed the idea that such an animal could ever exist in North America, let alone the rest of the world. I suddenly had an idea. I would phone my friend Tricia, someone I had known for years, that I'd always thought was very cuckoo, especially when she would talk about Bigfoots all the time. Everyone would roll their eyes when she talked about the creature because they thought she was off her trolley and stark raving mad. Maybe I had misjudged her, I thought. I phoned Tricia and told her everything that was going on at my property. and she was wonderful and really responsive. I told her about the groceries being pinched and the red eyes on my children that they had seen at the window. I told her that I could not afford to stay at my property if the creature kept stealing my food, and I really was beginning to wonder if this Bigfoot was the reason no one stayed on the property for long. "You're lucky," she told me. "It does not sound that he was aggressive towards you." "I mean, did he growl?" "No," I said. "I didn't hear anything. He just looked at me with a curious look on his eyes." Were you afraid of him?" she asked. "I felt so tiny next to him," I said. "But at that moment when I saw him, I think I was so surprised. It was such an unexpected sight, seeing something like that in my kitchen. It was so out of place. It almost seemed surreal. I think I was really too shocked to be afraid." "Well, that's promising," she said. "Well, is there anything I can do to keep the creature away?" I asked her. "There is something that could help. You do have boys, and so why don't you get them to pee around the perimeters of your property?" "What would that do?" I asked. "Well, the male urine will set a boundary that Bigfoot will hopefully respect." "How often should I do this?" I asked. "Get your kids to pee around your property twice a week indefinitely." "Will it work?" I asked. "I hope so," she said. "It really depends on the Bigfoot. I mean, most of them are so elusive they would never steal your shopping. This one of yours is bold, or he has a hell of a sweet tooth, as you say. And you know what they say about sugar? It can be a very addictive drug. And maybe that's why he's this bold, because he's just hooked on the stuff." "So you think this Bigfoot is a sugar addict?" I asked. "Well, if he has picked out all the sweet stuff from your shopping bags, I would say that he has an insatiable desire for sugar." "What about the red eyes?" I asked, "and the fact that my son thought the creature was a ghost because it seemed to float and then vanish?" "There are lots of reports like that with Bigfoot, you know. They're extremely graceful despite their size. And during the night, the red eye shine, I imagine, would seem almost supernatural. So no, you haven't got ghosts, but a regular Bigfoot probably, and maybe he's very curious about you and the family." So that's what we did all that time ago, and it's now been 5 years, and I'm glad to report that we have not seen the creature since. So I think he got the message with the urine markers from my boys. Believe me, it worked, which was a huge relief, because I really did not want to move from my dream home. From time to time, I've thrown some sweet red apples over the fence to help wean the Bigfoot off his sugar addiction, because I always kind of feel a little bit sorry for the poor thing, and they always vanish, so I imagine he is eating them. I'm grateful that he was not aggressive, but I'm more surprised that I did not feel any real fear, which is amazing because, believe me, these creatures are massive. And please don't ever underestimate what they are capable of, because I think they could be extremely dangerous. I've just been very lucky. I hope you enjoyed my story. What a fantastic story. Thank you so very much. Until next time. Hello there. Good evening to you. Isn't it a lovely evening tonight? And I really appreciate you joining me. I've got such a lovely Bigfoot story for you tonight, all from the Alaskan Triangle, where so many mysterious things happen there. There have been reports of very strange and unusual animal sightings, people who've seen UFOs and heard all kinds of, supernatural stories out there, including, of course, Bigfoot. And that's our favorite subject. So let's get started. I hope you enjoyed the story, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel because I've got some amazing new stories coming up that you don't want to miss out on. Dear Sarah and all your listeners, I have lived in Alaska all my life. We're talking about a place that is quite literally twice the size of Texas. My Alaska is 57 million acres of wilderness, of which so much has never been explored. It is a well-known fact among the locals that live here that 16,000 people have gone missing here. When I say missing, I mean no trace of the body was ever found or recovered. The person just vanished into thin air with no sight or sound of them ever heard again. I live in the Alaskan Triangle that has been considered the most formidable, dangerous and deadly, even more so than the Bermuda Triangle. and you are 3 times more likely to go missing here than from any other state in the whole of North America. At the first time of my Bigfoot encounter, I lived near the village of Sterling in southern Alaska, which is a very beautiful and remote part of the world, and I lived in a lovely cabin. My nearest neighbor was about 2 miles away from me, so that's how remote I really was. Before I tell you about my Bigfoot encounter, I want to tell you that Alaska is one of the most haunted places in North America. Stories abound in this part of the world about ghostly encounters, apparitions, alien abductions, wormholes, vortexes, including animal sightings of strange creatures that have never been documented by science. I personally believe that Bigfoot is one of those creatures. I built my cabin from scratch with my husband Bill, and no expense was spared in creating our beautiful wilderness home. I enjoy the remoteness of my life, as strange as that might sound to your listeners, and being cut off from the excesses of the material world is something I thrive on and relish. I love the raw realness of nature, and even the cruel hardness of life here has an incredible, formidable beauty about it. My husband spends his day trapping, and I am an artist spending time painting the natural world, and in Alaska there is so much untapped beauty to paint. And many of my works are sold in Anchorage to tourists who want to take a piece of Alaska back home with them. One day I was going berry picking close to my home in summer, and I felt certain I was being watched by something. I had never felt this level of fear before, because I sensed that a predator had its eyes on me. Nothing is more frustrating in this entire world than being unable to see the thing that is stalking you, and that was my situation. Every time I moved, this thing would move, and when I stopped, it would stop too. I was troubled by this experience because I could tell that the thing that was stalking me was bipedal. It was definitely walking on 2 feet. And whatever it was, it stunk. There are lots of smells I'm familiar with in Alaska, but this smell was different, and it was nasty, with a sulphurous skunk overtone. I have no other way to describe it, so I won't even begin to try. I immediately raised my rifle and looked through the scope to see if I could see anything. The only thing I can say is that I caught a brief sighting of this large, big black mass, almost floating past me like an apparition. It happened so quickly, and then it was gone. Whatever it was, I knew it had gone, but I was left wondering what on earth I had seen. And I was so freaked out that I returned to the cabin in haste. That night my husband was not at home because he was staying in Anchorage with his parents, as his mother was poorly at the time and he wanted to help out his dad in taking care of his mum. I made a fire, cooked dinner, and curled up on the sofa to read a book. Before long I had fallen asleep, and I was awoken to the sounds of wood knocks all around my cabin, and the sounds were frightening because I could hear this heavy breathing and the occasional grunt. My thoughts returned to my berry picking earlier in the day. Had the creature who'd been stalking me followed me home? And if so, how great a threat was this animal? What was it, I wondered? People think that if you live off-grid in the Alaskan wilderness, you must be brave. But that is one thing that I am most certainly not. Suddenly I felt terribly alone and incredibly vulnerable in my cabin. I really wanted to contact my husband immediately and beg him to come home, but I just could not do it. I knew I needed to deal with my fear and overcome it, and there was no time like the present. And I also knew that my husband needed to be with his dad to look after his mother. Luckily, after a while, all was quiet, and I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. I walked outside my cabin and fired some warning shots outside to make sure that I would truly scare that creature off, whatever it was. Suddenly, from behind a large tree, I saw a figure literally floating towards me with the stealth of a cheetah and the fluidity of a ghost, although I've never seen one, but that's how I imagine a ghost would appear. In the darkness, this creature was formidable. The red eye shine was truly haunting, and against the darkness of the night, those eyes glowed like red-hot coals of fire. I had never seen such a large black mass in the night shadows before. You really could be forgiving for believing you were seeing something paranormal, but this creature was as real in its life force as you and I are. And he was without doubt incredibly dangerous. He snarled at me, curling up his lips, and I realized that my gunshots had done nothing to scare him, but in fact they had provoked him to such anger, and I knew by the way that he looked at me, he was going to kill me without a shadow of a doubt. I'm ashamed to say that my fear completely paralyzed me. You would think that with my hunting background, growing up in the Alaskan wilderness, that I would have my rifle on the ready, but instead I realized that it had fallen on the ground out of my hands in a moment of agonizing fear. I can only tell you this, I was frozen to the spot. Forget what they tell you about the adrenaline surge causing you to run for your life in moments of terror. Nothing could be further from the truth in my case. I felt like a rusty old piece of iron that had not been oiled in hundreds of years and was way too heavy to move. My legs felt so heavy and my body so tight, with such a fear that was so palpable that I just stood there waiting to face what was coming. And by the look of the creature, death was beckoning at my door. The creature lunged towards me and threw me into his arms, and I found myself being carried on his shoulders at lightning speed. But then I suddenly heard gunshots. My husband was standing there with a rifle in his hands, and he was firing shots at the creature, and his jaw was hanging open with horror at what he was witnessing. It seemed that my husband fired at the creature, and the bullets just almost ricocheted and bounced off him, almost as if he really was supernatural, because it failed to touch him. Finally, one of the shots did hit the creature in his large muscular arm, and I saw blood squirting out of his body. He threw me to the ground, and luckily I landed on a pile of leaf litter, and so was miraculously unhurt. But then I saw the creature in anger lunging towards my husband, who immediately let out a few more rounds of bullets at the creature. Once one got caught on his leg, and again I saw blood oozing out of the wound. Despite the creature's mammoth size, the gunshot to the leg really sealed the deal, and the creature ran off whimpering like a puppy who had been reprimanded. I'll never forget that whimpering sound. It was pathetic for a creature as massive and as huge as that. I was astonished. I could not believe my husband had come back home in the nick of time when he was supposed to be in Anchorage with his parents. He said that when he was with his dad, he heard a voice telling him that your wife is in danger, and he wasted no time in obeying that voice. I told you things are weird out here in Alaska, and that the paranormal is a constant in this part of the world. There's so many experiences I could tell you about that I have no explanation for. Something or someone told my husband to return home quickly, and he said the voice was so real and so authoritative and so commanding that he really believed it to be true. But when he saw the creature carrying me on his shoulders, it was the most horrifying scene he had ever witnessed in his entire life. Being an artist, I naturally drew the creature, and my husband said it was an incredible likeness. The trouble was that in the darkness of the night, with only the light from my cabin, it was difficult to see him clearly enough to get down all those details. But I know without a doubt that we saw a Bigfoot that night. All I remember is his nasty odor, which was the smell I had noted when I was berry picking earlier on in the day. I also know he had much longer arms than we do, very long, dense black hair, which I believe was the carrier of the nasty stench. His eyes were huge at night, but possibly a lot smaller during the day because of the effects that eye shine can create. It does tend to make eyes look a lot bigger at night. His face had human and ape-like features, that were married together. And as for height, he was about 10 foot in stature and 10 feet in width, and that's no exaggeration. But I promise you, in Alaska, all the animals are always bigger. So maybe Bigfoot is too. Weeks passed without incident, and then one day we came home to find our cabin completely trashed from top to bottom, and there was nothing left of all the hard work that we had put into creating our dream home. As I walked around the damage, I could smell the telltale nasty odor of that rank creature, so I knew without a doubt who the culprit was, and he had come back to wreak revenge on us. He wanted to show us in no uncertain terms that he was boss. My husband and I got the message very, very quickly, and we wasted no time in moving away to Fairbanks in Alaska and building ourselves a beautiful new home, but not nearly as remote. I do feel safer in my new abode because at least I'm far away from that creature that terrorized me that night. I do believe he was not really harmed by those bullets because of his massive size. So if you're in any doubt about Bigfoot, one thing I know for sure, there are creatures like him wandering around our wilderness here in Alaska. And who knows, they may account for all the missing cases that happen in the Triangle year after year. I know my husband would be one of those people today wondering on earth what had happened to me, but luckily he got home in time to save my life. I have no idea what this creature's intention was with me, but I am sure of one thing: I would ultimately have ended up on his dinner table. I hope you enjoyed my story. That was an incredible encounter. Thank you so very much, and don't forget to subscribe. Well, hello there. I hope you enjoyed the omnibus edition. We've got many more coming our way for you to listen to. Sending you love wherever you are in the world, in North America, Canada, Kenya, wherever you may be. I send you lots and lots of love. Thank you for listening to my omnibus, and I really do hope you enjoyed it, because that's the whole idea about it, is to give you some interesting stories to listen to. So until next time, goodbye and good night.